就首先咧歡迎。
I welcome deputations and individuals for joining us today. I am the chairman. Let me remind deputations and individuals that you may use the earpiece. There are several channels. Channel 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, 3 is 普通话. We will ask deputations and individuals to speak in the order of their number. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak. So please be mindful of the time you have. When your time is up, you will hear the bell. Let me also remind you that if you have not provided us your written submission, please give us it after the meeting. Please give it to the Secretariat. I also remind members that what you say today here is not protected by the LegCo Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Your submissions is not protected either. And I also draw your attention to members attending public hearings as well as those sitting in the public gallery. You will find the points to note. It has been sent to you, attached to the letter sent to you by the LegCo, and is also in front of you. And if you wish to do so, you may also ask for a copy from the security staff of LegCo. If there are no other questions, I will start this session. First, Ms. Lam. We're here to talk about the National Anthem Law. I think it's not whether we should have it, it's how it should be implemented for the benefit of Hong Kong people. It's been a decade or so since the reunification. Hong Kong has become more populistic. It is ridiculous because there is serious internal attrition. People are fighting amongst themselves. This is ludicrous, and other people find it ridiculous that we spend so much time fighting amongst ourselves. I am a Hong Kong person. I see that Hong Kong people discriminate against one another. We are very short-sighted, and they blatantly use threats to achieve their goals. They keep belittling other people. They keep getting together and shouting at the top of their voice. What we see is that we're unable to implement any policies. We are a city of complaints. People will just burst into bad words. We see that an honorable legislator would indecently assault a female staff, took her phone and went to the male toilet with it. When he came out, he said that he wasn't wrong. We know that Hong Kong is sick to the core. It doesn't matter whether apologies are sincere because it's too late. Hong Kong should not be like that. Hong Kong should never be like that. When it comes to the National Anthem Law, just like other livelihood issues, the focus is wrong. What is the purpose of the chamber? The chamber is to discuss how it is best to implement a piece of legislation. And we see something called lazy flinging of invectives, no matter what. Only people who are late are afraid of clocking themselves in, people who are afraid of people who break the law are afraid of the law. So the opposition legislators, district councils, please turn back before it's too late. The district council and the legislative council is not to be used in this way because Hong Kong people will suffer. Please spare us so that Hong Kong can do what it's supposed to do for matters to be discussed. Thank you. Next is Mr. Lei San. Thank you. We strongly today support the legislation for National Anthem Law because the national emblem, national anthem are very important. We already have laws that demand respect of our national anthem and national flag. They should be the same for our national anthem. Well, in a football game, when the national anthem was played, people turned their back towards it and boo it. It's disrespect. And if you don't respect your own race and your own country, then foreigners will not respect our country and will not respect us. This is not in line with Hong Kong's core values. These people don't realize they are wrong because there is no law. They don't have to pay any cost. That's why we do need the rule of law. We need the National Anthem Law as soon as possible. Some people say that we have freedom of expression, freedom of creation, and they use these to oppose to the National Anthem Law. Well, for the Basic Law Articles 19 and the BORO 16, yes, freedom of expression is enshrined. However, there are some restrictions, including the respect of other people's rights and reputation and to protect public order. So there are explicit restrictions of freedom of expression, so people can't use this to oppose to the legislation. There is also a small group of people who try to smear the National Anthem Law, saying that it is a method for brainwashing. Of course, well, there isn't a country that do not implement a civic education. We have heard from a recent speech of our leader Xi Jinping that we have to enhance the national awareness and patriotism of Hong Kong, of people in Hong Kong and Macau. So we should lose no time to legislate for national anthem. Well, in a lot of countries there are laws of the national anthem. After unification, one country, two systems is very important. But it is even more important to protect the integrity of our country. If you respect and love your national anthem, that means you love your country. So we strongly ask for legislation of National Anthem Law. Thank you. Next, Ms. Lau Sun Ting. National anthem, just like national flag, national emblem, represents a country. There is a very significant cultural and historical significance. We have duty to respect and protect the dignity of these things. We need to protect the national anthem. We need to protect the dignity of the national anthem. Legislating to protect the national anthem is important. In some recent major events, there are some radicals opposing to, well, they did something to insult the national anthem. The situation's getting worse and it's out of control. They dare not insult the national emblem or the national flag because they are protected by the law. We still don't have national anthem law. It gives a chance for these troublemakers and radicals to make trouble. We have to stop this bad phenomenon. We have to put Hong Kong back to the right track, so there is an urgency. Next, Mr. Fu Kei-ming. Thank you. The national anthem represents the country, also represents the sovereignty and dignity of the country. So when it comes to personal habit or international standard, our association supports the legislation. When it comes to personal habit, well, We've had music lessons when we were young, and we still remember it. And the music teacher and as well as the discipline teacher told us that we will teach you 2 songs, national anthem as well as the school song. National anthem represents the country, school songs represent our school, and we have to remain stand up, and we have to sing at the top of our voice. We cannot make a mockery of it. Every day when I was promoted to secondary school, every month there was a flag raising ceremony. Well, during hot seasons, it's very difficult. However, principals and the teachers were standing there as well, accompanying the students. So students were happy to be in the flag raising ceremony. Well, in recent years in universities, during the ceremony when the university starts, we will hear the national anthem, and every day we hear the national anthem from the television as well. And local legislation for national anthem is not something surprising. Well, when it comes to other countries, the US, Japan, Singapore, Russia, Canada, Malaysia, Philippines, and India, well, there are also laws demanding respect of national anthem. Well, you will have to stand upright, you have to take off your hat, otherwise you will be seen as disrespecting the national anthem, and that will be fine or even imprisonment. Hong Kong is an international city, so we do need local legislation. Thank you. Next is Mr. Zhang Pang. Good afternoon, everyone. The National Anthem Law has been endorsed by the NPCSC and added to Annex 3 of the Basic Law. According to the Basic Law Annex 3, we need to have local legislation. And all 16 articles in the National Anthem Law, do we accept them all? Well, there is already the constitutional framework. We need to take into Hong Kong's situation into account and make appropriate adjustments. That should be what we're discussing about. And we raise comments and suggestions that is in line with the Constitution and the Basic Law. I noticed that when it comes to three sections, that is 7, 11, and 15, they are closest to the heart of Hong Kong people. And these 3 involved some concepts of correct understanding of the national law as well as penalties. And these will be areas that we need to talk about. It is normal to have different views. When we come across different views, shouldn't we try to understand why the others see it differently? I believe that if we respect one another, if we agree to disagree, then we will feel respected, and we can better forge consensus. We can forge consensus. National anthem represents a country, is an important component of dignity. It should not be used as a tool to express different views. So I myself and my association support the early implementation of the national anthem. It's not whether we should have a local legislation. We should focus on how. Honorable legislators, please work together with the Hong Kong SAR government and do the local legislation well. Next, Ms. Guan Suk-yi. Our association strongly support local legislation of the National Anthem Law. legislating this piece of the law protects the dignity of the country and its chance for our prosperity to understand the spirit of our motherland. Well, previously there were some sports games, and spectators boo the national anthem, and they even said that they have freedom of expression. It is expected to respect the national anthem of one of each other's country, and it is usual to see that national anthem being played before important sports games. We should respect other people's national anthem, let alone ours. Though the booing of national anthem brought shame to Hong Kong. A new generation doesn't know too much about China history. It says in the law that national anthem should be an important component of primary and secondary education. It is very important. I do think that they have already taken into account Hong Kong's actual situation to protect Hong Kong, to protect the country's dignity and integrity. And in order to allow our young generation to understand our national anthem, we need the law. Next is Mr. Hon LegCo. Good afternoon, everyone. We support the local legislation of the national anthem. The central authorities has already passed the National Anthem Law. On the 4th of November 2017, the NPCSC made the decision to include National Anthem Law into Annex 3 of the Basic Law. So we have entered the stage of local legislation, and this is our view. First, we have to make clear the essence and importance of the legislation. Article 1 and 3 stipulates that, this is to regulate the performance, singing, playing, and the use of national anthem to enhance the sense of nation amongst citizens, to promote patriotism, and to cultivate and practice the core values of socialism.
The national anthem of the PRC symbolizes the PRC. All civic organizations should defend and respect the national anthem. Hong Kong is starting local legislation. We must follow the basic law principles. We must take the national anthem as the basis, and we should take into account local conditions in order to promulgate the national anthem. And we should handle the national law issues according to law. Those who distort the lyrics of the national anthem in public venues, or who insult the national anthem in other occasions, that should be prosecuted where it breaks the law. As Hong Kong engages in local legislation, we should have reference to existing principles and establish sanctions so that the law is executed and implemented in a serious way. It is hoped that the local legislation of national anthem should be based on the one country, two systems principle, and should proceed in a reasonable way, and it should ensure that the law is seriously effected. Next, Chen Shi-yi. We think there should be local legislation of the national anthem. It represents the nation. The SAR government should legislate the national anthem as soon as possible. Hong Kong practices one country, two systems. Hong Kong people should respect China's sovereignty over Hong Kong. Now, slogans like maintaining the freedom of creation is only an excuse to gain support. The purpose behind that is to disrupt public order. The government has already indicated that the National Anthem Law is only against who break the law deliberately, who challenge the law and cause incidents. The law would not be executed in a careless way. Ordinary people will not have to worry. Currently, national anthem education is now being practiced in Hong Kong secondary and primary schools, but the schools are not that aware of it. Then, after the law is promulgated, guidelines should be provided to the schools. That would clarify matters, and the students would recognize their responsibilities as subjects of the country. Some people say the national anthem doesn't represent Hong Kong. This is only their personal views. I think this is unsound principle. Next, Mr. Zhang Hiuyu. I think the national anthem is the soul of a country and is the anthem of the nation. Our ancestors fought in an anti-invasion war. They fought bravely. The national anthem calls upon us not to forget our roots and to remember our predecessors in their heroic efforts. Hong Kong people, as Chinese people, should respect the national anthem. It's just like the fact that we must respect our parents. So I think we must not be light-handed in the way we regard the National Anthem Law. I represent our youth association and call upon us to support the National Anthem legislation. We must not insult the national anthem by various means. Such behavior is an indication of disrespect for the history of our motherland. Now, in Macau, the education sector attaches a lot of importance to the education of the national anthem. Since the establishment of the Macau SAR, patriotism has been carefully cultivated, and many primary and secondary schools in Macau have long since incorporated the national anthem as the curriculum. Every Monday there's a flag raising ceremony, and many students have a deep understanding and recognition for the national anthem. The children learn from early days to respect the national law and what it means. Hong Kong should learn from that experience. We can seek the views in schools in different districts, and there should be periodical flag raising ceremonies and publicity activities to raise the awareness of the school children regarding the national anthem. Now, national anthem education is quite common around the world. Now, incorporating the National Anthem Law in Annex 3 of the Basic law is necessary. Next, Mr. Zhong Wei-Chang. Good afternoon. The Zhongji Cultural Association supports the legislation of the national anthem. We should fulfill our duties as citizens. When you are abroad and you have some difficulty, you can seek help from the Chinese embassy. And the MPCSC has already stipulated that the national anthem law should be incorporated into the Constitution. And some minority people in Hong Kong, they use verbal violence, filibustering, etc., inside the LegCo and outside to try to stop the legislation of the national anthem. Now, their twisted arguments are weak. Those who propose objecting to the national anthem legislation, some of them, in fact, corroborate with certain elements outside Hong Kong, and they and also one reason is that the SAR government hasn't done a good job on the national anthem education, so some young people have a misunderstanding. So the legislation would provide the opportunity for people to gain a better understanding of the national anthem, the national flag. And one part of the national anthem says that at a crisis point in our history, every Chinese person should be aware and oppose wrongful deeds, and we should try to maintain the dignity of the national anthem. And I remember that last year we on the National Day we witnessed the flag raising ceremony on Tiananmen Square, and I really felt proud that I am a Chinese national. Next, Mr. Yang Xiangjun. We express our support for the national anthem legislation. The national anthem stands for it represents the nation, and it is dignified. And other countries have national anthem laws. The SAR government has a duty to maintain national dignity through this legislation. And last year, the MPCSC has stipulated the national anthem legislation is to be included in Annex 3 of the Basic Law. And so the SAR government has the duty to implement that. Now, the law is not to restrict the daily life of the Hong Kong public. The SAR government should try to study the proposed legislation so that people are not easily caught by the law. And when there are sound provisions to follow, then people would not misinterpret the national anthem legislation. When there is going to be publicity and education on the national anthem, the public would gain a better understanding of the provisions, and after the local legislation, there should be a stepping up of education in schools and in society. Next, Ms. Laina. Our association supports the National Anthem legislation, and this is in keeping with the one country, two systems principle. The National Anthem Law is a national law, and it's been incorporated into the basic law, so there must be legislation locally. The national anthem, like the national emblem and the national flag, have their solemn significances, and they are protected by law, and we have the duty to maintain that. And the SL government, now the National Anthem legislation has constitutional significance. The SL government should support the dignity of the country, and so we need to legislate. Thank you. Next, Ms. Lau Yun Kam. Thank you, Chairman. As an ordinary member of the public, I very much wish the government can complete the National Anthem legislation as soon as possible. We know that the Hong Kong society is now at a very serious state. Now, if there is no law to follow, and also we see so many problems arising at LegCo, and the law is not executed. And when law has been introduced, shouldn't the government implement and execute the law? We rely on the government's execution and implementation of legal provisions so that the society can be more harmonious and calmer. The SL government has the role to ensure that the society can develop in a lawful manner. After legislation, the SL government should execute the law stringently and not haphazardly. So it's hoped that after National Anthem Law is legislated, the law enforcement should be serious and effective. Otherwise, things cannot work out in society, and the public has difficulties in our daily lives. Now, I hope the members, at least some of them, will not filibuster. Next, Mr. Yang Wai-Kwan. Thank you, Chairman. Now, as the previous speaker said, now I am also a member of the public. I hope the SL government would legislate and enforce the law as quickly as possible. In many countries, there is within the Constitution provisions to maintain the dignity of the national flag, national anthem, and the national emblem. Now we are in an age of rule of law, and yet there is a very small minority of people that is disrupting our social order. This will not be helpful for maintaining the dignity of the Constitution. It has been over 20 years since reunification. Hong Kong is part of China. Very often in our system, we are lagging behind the development of the nation as a whole, so we cannot defend our Constitution. As a member of the public, I feel that the Hong Kong government should enforce legislated laws in a stringent manner. Those who break the law should be sanctioned according to law. Only then would Hong Kong fulfill its duty. Now, Hong Kong's social environment is rather unique. Very often in large-scale activities, a small minority of bad people cause incidents and disrupt social order. Now, the Hong Kong government should conduct publicity and education in schools and other organizations so that the public and the students have a greater understanding of the significance and meaning of the national flag, national anthem, and national emblem. Now, this would be a great help for our members of the public. Now, through these activities, I acquired more identification of our own status, and we should cultivate the same in our young. Next, Mr. Ma Man-chung. Thank you, Chairman. First, I absolutely support the legislation of the National Anthem Law. Now, very early on, the National Anthem has become part of the Constitution, and the National Anthem legislation became part of the National Constitution last October the 1st.
And the Hong Kong SAR government shall legislate in order to implement that. And therefore, we have the responsibility to enact local legislation to implement this. This is our responsibility. In fact, the national anthem and national emblem are both the symbolization or symbol of our country, and therefore, we have the duty to make sure that we respect it. In other words, we have to respect our national anthem, and both the national flag and national emblem, they have been enacted. They have been implemented by way of domestic legislation, and therefore we have to look at the local circumstances, and through local legislation we have to look at how it should be implemented, and we can also make reference to the experience in enacting local legislation for national flag and national emblem. In many other countries, they have already got similar legislation, for example, in the US, Canada, Singapore, and Malaysia, and so on. In Australia, even though they do not have a similar piece of legislation, they've already got guidelines in place. It shows that many other countries also respect their own national anthem, and it's also an act to show their respect for their own country. When we go to their countries, we would also respect their national anthem, and therefore we should also respect our own national anthem, and therefore it is a matter of course that we should enact local legislation. In fact, if you look at the legislation, it's very clearly spelled out, but then some people question, how come with regard to the word respectful, what does that mean? In fact, being respectful, I think is very easy to understand. I think it's just common sense to understand why and how it should be done. In fact, even a small child should understand how it should be interpreted. And also, with regard to Article 11 that national anthem should be taught at secondary and primary school. I think everybody should understand it, and I respect what the former Secretary for Constitutional Affairs said. That is, that should be done by way of guideline. That would be more appropriate, and it should not be done by way of legislation. Yes, that's right, because for secondary and primary school students, they are still in the process of learning, and therefore they should be guided instead of being mandated. Yes, Mr. Tong. I don't think I need to explain why we need to introduce local legislation on national anthem. Being a citizen of a country, I think it's just basic knowledge that we should respect the national anthem. But then for those who are against it, I'd just like to say that, well, they put up many arguments. For example, you could be caught inadvertently by the law, and also if you cross the road and all of a sudden if you hear the national anthem, or if you just watch the TV at a Hong Kong style cafe, should you stand up too? Well, I think they have interpreted or they have thought too much into it. In fact, I think they've escalated it to a level that they are actually having this phobia. In fact, with the implementation of National Anthem Law, in fact, if the wording is clear, if you respect your national anthem, you do not have to worry at all. And for many, they just try to demonize the national anthem, and they even describe it as something that the authorities might be criminalizing speech. In fact, that's not true. In fact, for freedom and human rights, it's not that there is unfettered rights and freedoms and so on, because if you just say anything you want, you could also be sued for libel. And therefore, I think they're just using this as an excuse, in particular for those with ulterior motives. Those politicians with ulterior motives would try to amplify this to such an extent that, well, they would also try to advocate for hatred or sentiments against our own country. I think that's most inappropriate. And also, well, people also say that once is enacted into law, then that could also form part of our education. In fact, by that time, when the National Anthem Law is enacted, yes, some of these acts could be criminalized, and I agree that for students in their learning process, in particular for primary school students, well, in the process of learning national anthem, they might not know what it is, and sometimes they might just sing it or perform it playfully. And therefore, I think it should be done by way of guidelines instead of criminalizing such acts. That should not apply to students. Well, as we all know, well, in many public occasions, well, there have been occasions where people just boo the national anthem. Well, when they do so, they just think about their own rights, but then what about their duties and obligations? When they go abroad with their passports, if something untoward should happen, where would they seek help? They always go to the Chinese embassy, and therefore if they insult our country, then they should be punished by law. Thank you. Thank you. Next, Mr. Socha Chan. Well, thank you, Chairman. The the lyric of the national anthem is like this. That is, arise if you don't want to be slave. Well, there are many people who are willing to be slaves, and they think that if they do so, then they'll be able to be on a par with those with overseas passports, and then they'll be able to be on the same footing as them. Well, I am one of those who would cry when I hear the national anthem, because I love my country, I love my family members, and therefore there is no need for legislation before I love my country and love my family, because it's not about politics, it's not about the law. And therefore, for many people who say that they are patriotic, but then they have been persecuted, they have been sent to jail, and they might even sacrifice their lives. If nothing is done, if we just say that we are patriotic, and if they can go to the upper society, then what does that mean? Well, what's the purpose of having the national anthem in the first place? That is because there are many people who boo the national anthem in the soccer pitch. So why have you not thought about why they are doing this? Why have they brought this sentiment to the soccer pitch or to the stadium? Well, if you do not resolve those very pressing problems that involve people's livelihood And if you do not resolve those problems, and instead you just resorted to patriotism and nationalism, then I think you're putting the cart before the horse. Well, just think about the purpose of introducing this legislation. That's to just uphold the core values of socialism and so on. But then, well, let's set aside whether or not it might conflict with the Basic Law or Article 5. Well, in fact, what about democracy, freedom, the rule of law, and also civilization? There are many things involved. If you just emphasize patriotism and set aside those other values, in fact, this act in itself is already very barbaric. And to do it by law is even more barbaric. I've never looked at what should have been our own rights. In fact, we are now worried about what we have had all the time, and yet we are gradually losing them. So, Secretary, you're asking Hong Kong people to help you complete your political task. Why do you not reflect on yourself? So, should you be serving Hong Kong people, and what have you done for Hong Kong's political development? And also, with regard to legislation on ideology, well, we have to look at the Basic Law. We have to do something in line with Hong Kong's situation so that Hong Kong people's democracy and rights would not be eroded, and there should be more room for freedom instead of eroding that or undermining it. This is the only way out in order to ensure Hong Kong can sustain its prosperity and stability. These are my remarks. Thank you. Next, Mr. Ho Wai-chun. Well, as an ordinary citizen, I cannot see why enacting on the national anthem will have any negative impact on Hong Kong people. Well, there are many people who have pointed out that well, they've come up with all sorts of arguments which are very strange. But then just take a look at the National Anthem Law. Well, the national flag and national anthem ordinance has been in place for 20 years. I've never seen any person who has been wrongly jailed. Last time, when someone was convicted, he was only fined $5,000. And if you litter, you have to be fined $2,000. And yet you're insulting our country, and yet you're only fined $5,000. And if they think that this is persecution, well, I don't really understand it. Well, there are people who come up with arguments saying that, well, when they are eating at a Hong Kong-style cafe, and if they hear the national anthem, do they have to stand up? Well, I've been in Hong Kong for many years. I've never seen someone who is enjoying his dish at a Hong Kong-style cafe, and then when the national flag is raised, he failed to stand up and then he's prosecuted. I've never seen that happen in Hong Kong. So I do not see how the National Anthem Law can be used as a tool to persecute people in Hong Kong. And some also say that that would also suppress derivative work. But then when you do recreation, why do you have to use the National Anthem? So why are you not using the victims of the 311 earthquake as the subject of your recreation? Because you know that that's very disrespectful, because it involves the loss of human lives, and therefore you should not be using that as the theme for your recreation or derivative work. And what is the song about, the national anthem about? Well, there were tens of thousands of people who lost their lives because they are protecting our country. And now you're telling me that you can play with this. You can play and make jokes of it, and you can also bully it. Well, if you do not respect yourself, it's fine, but then you have to respect others. I'm a Chinese national. I do not want to be disrespected, and therefore enacting law on the national anthem is not about disrespecting people. In fact, it's to protect those who would like to respect our own country. So please show us your respect. We want to respect our country. Also, well, with the local legislation on the national anthem, well, you're talking about deliberately or publicly or willfully insulting the national anthem. When we go to the Hong Kong Stadium, you know that the national anthem will be played and performed. And if you just booed it, then of course you should be arrested. But then if you forget to stand up when you hear the national anthem at home, then of course you will not be arrested. So for those in the opposition camp, please be smart and do not insult the wisdom of Hong Kong people. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Lek, Chairman, and for those of you at the meeting, good afternoon. I believe that enacting on the National Anthem Law is one of the responsibilities of the Hong Kong self-government in discharging its duties, and that would also help enhance Hong Kong people's awareness of being citizens of our country. In fact, in public events and activities, when the National Anthem is played, we should all stand up seriously, and that's what we should be doing. And therefore, with regard to the use of National Anthem and also for public acts and so on, well, the law is to regulate that, and I think it's reasonable and it's a matter of course. Well, we can say that the National Anthem very often is treated as the first line of voice for the country, and in preserving it, I think we should only spell out the etiquette when the National Anthem is played and performed. I think it will help promote patriotism. I think it has an important meaning. And also, with regard to the National Anthem, many people are concerned about their own freedoms, and in some public events like competitions and so on, as some have pointed out, well, some people might engage in very radical acts, and if they attach importance to their own rights and freedoms, then have they reflected on themselves whether or not such behavior or acts, well, when they are in our society, they should also be very careful about their obligations. And also in some countries, well, national flag, national emblem, and national emblems are very important symbols of their countries, and in many other countries where there is a constitutional requirement, and there are some 51 countries with such practices, for example, Russia, Kazakhstan, and also Canada, and so on. They have also dedicated legislation on national anthem, and in the US, they've also got national flag law, and whenever the national anthem is played, if the national flag is hoisted, for those in military uniform, they would also have, you would have to salute to them, and you would also have to behave in a certain manner. And I think many people are already very used to that. And even in major competitions, even in the US, and if you act in a very disrespectful manner, you would also have to be punished. As far as Hong Kong is concerned, well, national anthem is an important symbol of our country, and to legislate to restrict certain acts so that we will not be insulting our country, that's very important to preserve the dignity of the national anthem, and that would also help promote patriotism amongst Hong Kong people, and that would also help enhance Hong Kong's image. Thank you. Thank you. Next, Ms. Chen Ka-wei. Thank you, Chairman. Well, in 1997, Hong Kong was returned to China, and since the reunification, we have put in place one country, two systems, and 20 years have elapsed. And during this period, well, we have had many occasions whereby national anthem was insulted. Well, in some of the soccer matches, there were also incidents of insulting the national anthem, and FIFA also issued warning letters to Hong Kong's local FIFA, and they've also sanctioned the local football association. I think for such incidents, for people who are patriotic to our country, they have also been dealt a serious blow. In fact, the national anthem is the dignity of not just our country, it's also us as individuals. So we should all respect our country, and therefore we should respect the national anthem. To have legislation on that would also prevent people from insulting that, or people who might have inadvertently been misguided by insulting the national anthem. In fact, some people think that the national anthem law is there to regulate people who have deliberately insulted the national anthem. Well, insulting the national anthem is tantamount to insulting our country, that is China, and also Hong Kong, and respecting our own country is like respecting ourselves, and therefore preserving or upholding the national anthem is like preserving and upholding our own dignity, and therefore we should have local legislation on the national anthem. Thank you. Thank you. Next, Mr. Leung Yuk Sing. Good afternoon, Chairman. Concerning the proposal to enact the National Anthem Law, I have the following views. Well, since the NPCSC's 29th meeting last year, that's the 29th meeting, what has been confirmed that our national anthem is a very important symbol of our own country, and therefore to legislate on the occasions on which the national anthem should be played and performed is only right, and that would also ensure the effective implementation of the Constitution in Hong Kong, and that's to preserve the dignity of our country, and that would also help promote our awareness and patriotism, and that's also helpful in preserving our core values. So this is our great nationalism, and therefore we encourage the entire country and all people to respect and promote the realization of the Chinese dream. And with the NPCSC passage of this, I think there are several meanings. Number one, through this we are going to implement this as part of our constitution, and that would also help promote our core values, and that would also help amplify our core values, and that would also help safeguard our rule of law. And also we will also have a better understanding of the national anthem, so that we'd be able to understand the problems, and we will also be able to know when and where the national anthem should be played and performed. And also with regard to the etiquette and also the protocol and so on, where it should not be played and performed, I think we would also know that. And thirdly, we have to look at the local circumstances, so that there would be both the stick and carrot approach, so that we'd be able to know as to when and where it should be played, and we will also be able to educate our public, so that they would also know how to love and respect their country. I think that would also serve a very important meaning. Worldwide, in many other places, they have similar legislation in place to establish the national flag, national emblem, and national anthem being the symbol of the country. And there are also dedicated legislation on this. And well, on the 4th of November last year, there was a decision made by the NPCSC stipulating that National Anthem Law be made part of Article 3, be made part of Annex 3 to the Basic Law. In other words, we have to enact local legislation to implement the National Anthem Law. That's our constitutional responsibility. And in order to realize the spirit and original intention of the national anthem, we have to preserve the dignity of the national anthem, so that there would be a basis for enforcing the law. I think all we need to do is to do it in a rational and objective manner, so that through local legislation we can enact this, and I think there are only benefits. Thank you.
唔該，下一位係楊愛群女士。
Next, Ms. Yang Ai-Kwan. Thank you. There is a need for Hong Kong to legislate the National Anthem Law in order to protect our sovereignty's dignity. Legislation will also enhance our patriotism. When there is legislation, then we have a law to follow. And it states that, well, people should preserve the dignity, people should show respect, and that is only basic courtesy. Respecting the national anthem is respecting our own dignity, so that is only a reasonable request. Only people who will break the law will be afraid of the law. Well, if you don't insult or do anything to defile the national anthem, then you will not be caught by the law. Incorporating the national anthem into primary and secondary curriculum is also very important, because it gives a chance for schools to teach students the history of our motherland. Younger generations need to be taught about their national identification since a young age. So I strongly support the legislation. Thank you. Next is Mr. Chen Lap-Ji. We are Chinese people. The country wants to enact this piece of legislation. Hong Kong will follow to legislate this legislation. It is only natural. Law-abiding citizens will not be afraid of legislation. Only people who have ulterior motive will evade and oppose to the legislation. Hong Kong faces a plight. It is because we don't have the mentality of the country. Hong Kong people are selfish. Our economy is stagnant. Property prices are high. There is wide wealth gap. Society is torn apart. There are many political parties. Impartiality of the law is challenged. There is also intervention of foreign forces, and they incite unrest as well. We need to reflect on this. We need to put Hong Kong back on track. How can we stay on the right track? We have to have moral. We have to be responsible towards society and our country. We are Chinese. We have to respect others before you can respect yourself. If you can't respect others, how can you respect yourself? So I hope that there will be legislation. With legislation, we have a clear goal. We will know what to do. Objectors use many excuses to oppose to it. We need the legislation as soon as possible so that we can be put on back on the right track. Thank you. Next, Mr. Gang Zhokgong. Thank you. On the 1st of October 2017, the National Anthem Law came into operation. The NPCSC in November decides that National Anthem Law should be included in Annex 3 of the Hong Kong SAR Basic Law. It will become an applicable national law. National law incorporated in Annex 3 should be implemented by local legislation as stated in one of the articles of the Basic Law. So we have constitutional duty to complete local legislation to implement the National Anthem Law. National Anthem reflects the spirit of a race. It's a symbol of a country, just like national flags and an emblem. It brings people together. It appeals to your patriotism. In major sports events, when sportsmen win, the national flag will be raised, the national anthem will be played. Chinese people are proud. All those presents will show respect to our national flag and national anthem. Our national flag and national anthem are respected overseas. In recent years, a small group of people disrespect our national anthem. They even did things that are derogatory. In a game in the Hong Kong Stadium, they insulted the national anthem, they booed the national anthem. What are we supposed to do? FIFA sent a warning letter and penalize Hong Kong FA. There are people who caused trouble when the national anthem was played in a university ceremony. What could we do? We could only suspend the ceremony. What are we supposed to do? There is no law to follow. So we need the legislation. We need local legislation. This is not just to punish. It sets the standard of the national anthem. It states what constitutes an offense, and if you have committed an offense, then you will be penalized. I support it. Next, Mr. Chui Ging Sing. National anthem represents a country, so it is a given to respect the national anthem. I thank the Constitutional Affairs and Mainland Affairs Bureau for coming up with this very good bill, but nothing is perfect. We hope that when it's implemented, it can be improved. I have an idea. When the national anthem is implemented, they should strengthen enforcement and education. On education, some people are concerned that it may affect academic freedom. It's very important to know our history. When we were having our music lessons when we were young, music teachers will talk about the history of Mozart and Beethoven, so that the students would easily feel these songs. Tian Han Nie, the songwriter of March of the Volunteers, went through difficult times. So this song was not written during an easy time. So enhancing education and publicity is very important, so that students and members of public will find it easier to feel the song. Enforcement now. Some people are concerned that enforcement may undermine freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is very important. It should be protected. But shouldn't other rights be protected? So when people mention about the football game, I don't remember. If you remember the result, I can't. Because people only remember that spectators disrespect the national anthem and boo it. No one remembers the result. The most important of that game may be the organizer or the footballers. They have put in a lot of hard work for just that 90 minutes. But people don't remember their hard work. So apart from enhancing enforcement, to protect the public, it also protects people who participate in the ceremony and the game. I am a Hong Konger. Lastly, I hope this bill is passed as soon as possible. Next, Mr. Guan Chep-Gui. I have 5 points to make. First, the National Anthem Law. Well, every country has their own national anthem to bring the people together. For the March of the Volunteers, it has a very good tempo and it has a very good history behind it. Well, we have constitutional obligation to pass the law. And when the national anthem is played in a solemn atmosphere, if someone does something to violate the national anthem without the law, we can easily see that there will be physical conflict. But if there is insult of the country, people can ask the police to enforce the law if there is the national anthem. This will be effective in reducing physical conflict. Some people say that there should be first education to teach Hong Kong people to respect the national anthem. There needs not be a piece of legislation, but there is a huge blind spot. If they are not Hong Kong or mainland citizens, and if they deliberately resist, well, you won't be able to educate them. You may recall that when it comes to the plastic bag levy, at the beginning people came up with a lot of reasons to oppose to it. However, with the implementation of the levy, abuse of plastic bag has been greatly reduced. You may remember that before 1997, although Chinese is an official language, it was not given any importance. It may be our motherland. The government did not attach importance to Chinese. Well, it was until the new secondary curriculum and the examination, that is DSE, which states that for Chinese language you will have to have at least level 3 standard before going to university. Well, a lot of people might have done well in other subjects, but they cannot meet the Chinese requirement. And it sees that nowadays parents attach importance to Chinese. A lot of people come up with a lot of creative scenarios. Say, for example, when you're eating in a Hong Kong-style cafe, and television plays the national anthem, should you stand up? If you're not well, should you stand up? I don't think I need to explain. Well, very often, sorry, your time is up. Next is Miss Deng Haotong. National anthem is a song that reflects the spirit of a race and a country. Every country has their own national anthem. The national anthem represents its people and its country. If people don't deliberately insult the national anthem, there is no need to be afraid that you break the law. There are many countries with national anthem law at 8 o'clock a.m. and 6 p.m. in schools, parks, television stations, and train stations. The national anthem will be played in Thailand. People will have to stand to attention, otherwise they will be arrested. And it states under the National Anthem Law that people should respect the national anthem, otherwise the police will enforce the law. Well, in an unofficial event, when the national anthem is played, well, people don't have to be afraid, because if you're not making trouble, then you will not break the law. And I have a suggestion to make here. Before legislation, please step up your education and publicity before enforcement, so that people will find it easier to understand. Next, Mr. Tam Tak-ji. I can see that apart from Sultan, who is my friend, the others is lopsided. People power seriously opposed to the National Anthem Law. All legislations that restrict people's human rights is draconian. This piece of legislation is poor legislation. Listen to it, Grandad. Article 35 of the PRC Constitution says that people have freedom of speech. Chiao Chiao-yang, Ronnie Tong, Carrie Leung, they have just been talking nonsense and points of opinion. So I want you to refer to Article 35 of the PRC Constitution. Well, if the spectators in a football game are all sick, wearing masks, and they should not be arrested. And let me change the lyrics for you. That this is words to the effect that the writer of the volunteer of the March of the Volunteer have been subject to torture and demeaning action during the time of the struggle. He suffered heart disease, diabetic. He was forced to drink urine by the Chinese Communist Party. So how can the CPC ask people to tell people to be patriotic? The writer Tian Chan of the National Anthem faces the same end of Liu Xiaobo. They are patriotic, but they have practically been killed by the country, just like Liu Xiaobo. We should not rewrite history just like the Japanese. You need to win the respect of people. CPC said a lot of lies. They said that they have risen. Hong Kong people are honest, but CPC uses power. They try to impose themselves on Hong Kong. But there is Article 23. There is also the proposed legislation of to penalize people who insult police officers. I remember what Liu Xiaobo said before he died, was to the effect, people will be liberated when CPC falls apart. Next, Mr. Tam Guoksen. Amazing China has taken Hong Kong for over 20 years. They now need legislation to protect their dignity. How sad. How come there are people who don't respect the national anthem? Is it because they don't respect Tian Han, the writer of the national anthem? Is it because they don't like the lyrics of Tian Han? They don't like Ne's score? It's because people don't like the power and the minions behind the national anthem. Please ask the person next to you to take the slogan down. If you don't respect our rules, I'll have to ask you to leave. Can I stand up to speak? No, please sit down. Please sit down. Please respect our rules. Okay, fine. I'll sit down then.
I'll come back to you later. Now, there is dictatorship. There is no integrity. There is corruption. So how can people respect the government? China has a constitution, but people are unlawful. They promised that there would be double direct election in 2007-08, and Article 21 of the Basic Law. All provinces and municipalities of China cannot interfere in Hong Kong's domestic policy. If you want Hong Kong people to really love China, you should give us genuine direct elections, popular universal suffrage, and you should get rid of the incapable officials, including the official who erected an unauthorized building structure. Now, Ms. Kwan said some people caused shame to Hong Kong. This includes officials which had false academic qualifications. And Mao Zedong also spoke on this. Ms. Qin Bofan. Now, I'm not very highly educated, but I've heard from the so-called elite who spoke. They supported the legislation of the National Anthem Law. They said other countries have national anthem laws. But they gave what examples? Thailand. Now, before 1997, Hong Kong was at the head of the four little dragons of Asia, and now Hong Kong is behind developing countries. Hong Kong is at the rear of developing countries. You should compare with leading economically well-developed countries. Now, Thailand has a national anthem law, so Hong Kong should have one too. Now, you are trying to gain security that way. Your nuclear bombs are useless. Now, one speaker referred to how the national anthem, the original song, was written. Now, what was the country named at that time? What was the name of the country at that time? Is the Republic of China. Do you need to legislate to be respectful to your parents? How are we Chinese? Because it's based on our Chinese culture. The countries that you named, are they countries of Chinese culture? Are you trying to divide the country? Are you trying to get other countries to intervene? Now, Chinese parents lead by example. In prisons, I see that young girls are drug addicts because their parents are the same. Rule of procedure. Next, Mr. CY Ho. On behalf of our association, I express the following views. We support the SAR engaging in local legislation of the National Anthem Law and to enforce it seriously. This local legislation is to realize the Constitution. The Chinese national anthem, flag and emblem are in keeping with stipulations in the Constitution. They are sacred and should not be subject to derision. This is now in November 2007 it's decided that the National Anthem Law should become part of the Constitution. Who is broadcasting some music? Who is playing some music? Please turn off all the pages and mobile phones. Please be seated. If you continue to behave that way, you should leave this chamber. Security officers, please invite her to leave. I'm going to toilet now.
好
Mr. C.Y. Hong, please resume. The local legislation should enable Hong Kong citizens, especially the young, to understand about the nation. There should be national solidarity. We should be aware of our history. The National Anthem was created in 1935 as the March of the Volunteers during the Japanese invasion. It reflects the seeking of national liberation, and it is a reflection of our spirit of resistance. So National Anthem enables us to understand our history and have self-respect. Now, maintaining the dignity of the national anthem, emblem, and flag is a common practice around the world, that is, through legislation. In other countries like Canada or in Russia, in Malaysia, there are provisions where people have to behave in a respectful manner when the national anthem is played. Next, Mr. Ho Kwan Yin. Mr. Ho, you can speak. The national flag, emblem, and the national flag, they are representations of the country's dignity. So there is common legislation. There's legislation around the world. So when people take on the citizenship of a country, they have to allege loyalty to that country's national flag. And the last year, the National Anthem Law is added to Article 3 of the Basic Law. And in Asian soccer meet in Hong Kong, there were incidents regarding the national flag, and it's been said that people should simply be left to behave by themselves, but this has not been effective. Now, so we should have National Anthem Law so that people are deterred from such acts. Now, people have to follow the law when they cross the road or drive cars in Hong Kong. So to maintain the national dignity, we must have the National Anthem Law, which should also carry sanctions for deterrence. Now, for law-abiding citizens, they will not object to National Anthem Law, but others, they engage in civil disobedience, etc., against that. Now, in the 20 years since their reunification, there has been a greater occurrence of incidents where people challenge the sovereignty of the central government. Now, so we must have sanctions to maintain order. Next, Mr. Chen Kwok-kei, the last speaker. Now, the $1 coin of the U.S. currency says, "In God we trust." Now, the Acts, chapter 11, verse 26, says that that there are different countries around the world, so we should do what we can to live better lives. Mrs. Chen Fong Fu Chan has been the senior official, top official of the World Health Organization for 14 years, and she has said that the national flag, emblem, and the anthem, they all represent the government, represent the nation. So any acts that harm the dignity of the national sovereignty should be discouraged. The Bible says has similar provisions. Our young people, now we should hear their voices, but we haven't had given them proper education. Now, as adults, parents, and teachers, we must inculcate proper values in our young. This is necessary if we are going to be responsible citizens. Some people distort the truth. They say patriotism education is brainwashing. Now they say occupying the central against the law is the right thing to do. Now we should legislate the National Anthem Law as quickly as possible. I believe our young people are law-abiding. Right now, the law is unclear. They don't know how to follow the law. Upon legislation, there would be fewer disputes. So I think the legislation is the right thing to do. Next, I'd like to ask the Secretary to respond overall. Now, are there members of LegCo who wish to speak? I'd just like to have an idea of who will speak. Now, as of now, we have 8 members who are in the queue to speak. They are Gary Fan, Claudia Mo, Ao Lok Him, Alice Mack, Yu Si Wing, Cheung Kwok Kwan, Chen Chi Chun, Lau Kwok Fan. So that's... Oh, there's one more, Ho Chun Yin. So 9 members, 4 minutes, including answer. So first, invite the Secretary to respond overall. We thank the deputations and the individuals who are here who have offered different views on the legislation of the National Anthem Law. Now, many of the deputations have expressed support for the legislation. Now, the national anthem symbolizes the country. Everyone should respect the national anthem. This is common sense. And some political groups have made certain political manifestations. Now, I'd like to make several points. First, the national Anthem Law is now added to Article Annex 3 of the Basic Law. It has to be implemented in Hong Kong. We're now doing it by local legislation. This is to realize the one country, two systems arrangement. We have to fulfill the national law in its spirit, and at the same time we have to take into account local conditions. Now, if you look at our document to the Constitutional Affairs Panel last month, you can see what work we have done. Now, in Articles 1 and 3, we identified the objectives of the law, and we made some adjustments and some wording like nurturing socialist values. Those will not appear. Now, in respect of education, the arrangements will reflect the requirement under the National Anthem Law to educate students about the National Anthem in our schools, and yet at the same time local conditions are taken into account. And also in the local legislation, now there's a mechanism for the licensed radio and TV stations to broadcast the national items of public interest. Now, and we also adopt our sanction system, and we adopt the sanctions in the local legislation on national flag and national emblem. Now, 2 of the 16 articles in the National Anthem Law only apply to the mainland and do not apply to Hong Kong, which is subject to one country, two systems as a special administration region. So the local legislation reflects our constitutional responsibility to adopt a national law as quickly as possible. At the same time, we have to have regard to local conditions. Now, in the course of our drafting the provisions, we will study the views of everybody concerned so that we will do a better job in our drafting. Now, secondly, as mentioned earlier, the national anthem represents our national dignity, and I think most people agree with that. We adopt a common sense approach. Of course, we have to respect the national anthem, and local legislation is one way.
And of course, that's not the only way. Education is also an important tool. And through enhancing the overall awareness in the community, if we can respect one another, even if we have different views, I think that sort of atmosphere would also help to enhance our show of respect for others. So it's not really something very difficult. On top of that, we also have to set boundaries on certain areas. For example, the local legislation on national anthem is to point to certain acts that are publicly and willfully, and if they do so deliberately, then they have to be held responsible. And on some occasions, for example, in soccer matches or is a graduation ceremony, if certain acts are displayed, apparently right now we are not able to do anything about it. And also, if there are many people who have done or worked very hard for that occasion, if some people deliberately destroy that or harm that occasion, then it's really regrettable. On one occasion, I was one of the speakers and also a panel judge for that competition, and many people had been waiting for a long time for that award ceremony in order to receive that honor. But then there were people demonstrating and deliberately harming the occasion. That's really regrettable. That's why we have to set the bottom line, so that we should ban people from deliberately performing or doing harm or insulting the national anthem. Yes, so there are three elements that we have to do it. That is, it's a public occasion, and second is a deliberate act, and third, you are deliberately trying to insult the national anthem. And when this happens, then of course the enforcement agency would also have to collect evidence to substantiate the case before any prosecution can be taken out. And if prosecution is taken out, then of course it's up to the court to look at the evidence in deciding whether or not the person or individual should be convicted. And it's a very stringent process, and of course I don't want this to happen at all. So when we go to the bottom of the matter, I'd like to earnestly urge those who are strongly against the enactment of National Anthem Law to look at our legislative intent. Number one, we have this constitutional responsibility, and number two, we hope that people will respect our national anthem. And if that is the case, then that's a very simple thing. And if such acts should appear, then we also have to have a mechanism to prevent or prohibit such acts from being taken. So that's very clear. Also, when we look at the details of the legislation, in fact, out of the 16 provisions, as I said, 2 would not be incorporated in the local legislation, and for others, one is about the commencement date. That is, after the enactment of the legislation, we have to have a commencement date, and therefore, generally speaking, there would not be any retrospective effect. And also, we would also not be doing this by way of the preamble, and there are 2 provisions with sanctions. Number one, that is, we are not allowing any commercials or trademarks to use the national anthem, and also we are trying to ban certain acts. So these are the 2 articles or provisions which would include a sanction. And then on other occasions, for anybody appearing or attending a function where the national anthem is played, and when the national anthem is played or sung, then you will have to engage in proper etiquette. So we would not be judging as to what you're doing or whether or not your etiquette is proper, because in the end, or at the end of the day, it has to be looked at from the perspective of whether or not it's done publicly, and whether or not it's deliberate, and whether or not it's insulting. And also on the provisions on education, some concerns were raised about this, and also about the sanctions. That's about section 15. Well, if you look at that, after we have published this brief, the next thing is for us to draft the detailed legislation or the provisions. And of course, we'll be listening very carefully to the views expressed before we do our work. So through such explanation and elaboration, I hope that you will have a better idea about what it is. And also about freedom of expression, and also freedom of creativity, and so on. I'd like to stress once again that the Basic Law protects our freedom, and our right to creation, and so on. But then it's not an unfettered right. And also, if you look at the CFA's ruling, it has pointed out that, to impose reasonable constraints or restrictions are in line with the provisions of the Basic Law. The most important thing is that we are not trying to prohibit the freedom of expression or creation, but then the most important thing is that you're not supposed to use the national anthem to express your different views. And if you're trying to create derivative work on the national anthem, that's something that is prohibited, because in our society we do have rights and freedoms on expression, but then there are things that we need to know. That is for the simple of our country. We have to respect that. And therefore, in this respect, if we can achieve a consensus, then in our society, I'm sure everybody will be able to rationally respect one another, so that we will all be working to promote the future prosperity and development of our country. Okay, but now the floor is open to our members. First, Mr. Gary Fan, 4 minutes, including both questions and answers. Well, Chairman, without our families, how can we have our country? And therefore, if the country loves us, then of course we would respect it too. And therefore, if our country has been benevolent, then people will respect it. But then if the regime is trying to impose draconian laws in order to regulate and force people to love it, then of course it's a problem. That's why what we're talking about here is about the freedom of speech and also the freedom of political expression, and also whether or not it's against the spirit of the basic law, and whether or not it's also against the spirit of the Constitution, and also whether or not the sanctions are too stringent and so on. Well, I'm grateful to those who have spoken today, but then according to what I heard today, out of the 30 plus deputations, about 6 or 7 have talked about ulterior motives and also people who are not patriotic and so on. I've heard a lot about this. I think that's really regrettable. And for the Chin Wan District Councillor representing the DAB, well, she's trying to just point fingers at the others and then she left afterwards. I think that only shows that she does not have the adequate knowledge about it. And I think some people have interfered with some speakers. Well, I like to listen to Mr. Tam Tek Chi or Raymond Tam. Well, he talked about the spirit of the provision and also how it conflicted with the basic law. I'd like to give some time to Mr. Tam so that he can continue with what he had been saying. Yes, Mr. Tam? Well, why don't you just say that PRC is really very good, and whatever it asks you to legislate, you can do it. Let's not talk to us about nationalism, that we should respect our country's spirit and so on. All right, our country is very strong, and therefore whatever I want you to do, you have to do it. Well, respect is something from the heart. All right, if I respect you or your mom, Mr. Holden Chow, and therefore can you legislate that we should not be insulting your mom and we can only respect your mom? Is that what you're trying to do? Mr. Gary Fan? Okay, so I'll continue. Well, just now, Secretary, you said that we had to apply our common sense, and many speakers have already said that, all right, it's only right, it's just natural. But then, indeed, that's true. But then, well, our deputations have also quoted many practices in overseas countries. For example, Mr. Hon LegCo said that in the U.S., if you disrespect your national flag, then you would also be censured. Well, the reason why we are very concerned about the proposal to legislate on the national anthem, that's because you're trying to introduce criminal sanctions against those who engage in acts that are disrespectful to the national anthem. That's problematic because you're trying to impose sanctions or criminal sanctions to force people to be patriotic, but then by that you're actually doing it by law, and yet that should have been done by way of education, and you should enhance people's awareness and understanding instead of just doing it by way of draconian laws. And also you're introducing very ambiguous laws, and it's also retrospective. That's against the common law spirit, and it's also contradicting the basic law, and you're trying to give rise to a lot of concerns and anxieties, and that's precisely why Hong Kong people are expressing their concerns about the proposed law. All right, Secretary, can you make it clear? Because you said that in the basic law, there is no mention of socialism and such ideologies and so on. And you said that in the preamble, you would be taking that out. But then for the other sanctions, whether or not they are too harsh and whether or not it's against the common law spirit, Secretary, how can you allay people's concerns about these? Well, point number 1, I'd like to remind members that if you want the Secretary to respond to your questions, then you will have to make sure that you will have time for him to answer. And if you have already used up your 4 minutes, then how can he respond? Ms. Claudia Mo, in our community, there are 2 overriding principles when it comes to national anthem and also patriotism and so on. You have to mention this because you shouldn't say that, well, we are legislating to uphold this, and if you do not breach the law, then you do not have to worry about anything at all. Well, that's wrong, because the law would definitely have to uphold humanistic thoughts and the spirit of humanities. So to what extent should we legislate? Does it mean that so long as we have this legislation in place, then if you steal with your left hand, then your left hand will be chunked off? Is that the case? Is that what you're going to do? In any civilized society, even today, well, they are still debating on whether or not abortion should be legalized and so on. You might say that you are a man and you are not a mother, and why should you be bothered? In fact, that involves a lot of moral issues. So you shouldn't just say that, even if there is a law, well, you have to legislate anyway, and if you do not break the law, then you do not have to worry about it at all. Well, that's wrong. The logic is simply wrong. And the second point is, you also have to bear this in mind. That is, it's not about that you ask me to be patriotic and why, well, I should just be patriotic then. In fact, patriotism should come from your heart. You try to protect your country so that it would not be harmed by draconian law. I think this is also a very important principle. And yet in Hong Kong, what we have heard, well, on the mainland, they've already made it clear that it's not just that they are making all the decisions, whatever they say is law. And when they say that we need to introduce this law, then nothing can be done about it. We have to do it. But then I just hope that it's not going to be too draconian. Well, just now, I couldn't read out your name. All right, So Cha Ha Yi Chan, Mr. So Cha Ha Yi Chan. All right, I thought you had left, and therefore I didn't think that I would be able to raise that with you. What I'd like to ask you is, you said that for those holding foreign passports, all right, you gave me the impression that, well, we are not supposed to talk about patriotism. Is that the case? And you also said that you were seeing that they were losing rights, and yet you're forcing people to be patriotic, and this so-called patriotic is barbaric. Does it mean that you are totally denying this? That is, so long as you have a foreign passport, then you should not be speaking loudly here about patriotism. And secondly, we should not be enacting on the national anthem because, in your view, there is no need for such legislation in Hong Kong. Is that right? Mr. So? Thank you, Ms. Mo. Well, if you want to legislate, then it has to be reasonable. But then if these things are not spelled out very clearly, then you're actually forcing people to accept this piece of legislation. That's not fair. So it's like the chief executive. You come out and say that, well, I don't think this is controversial at all. I don't think anybody will be against it. I don't think you should be speaking on our behalf at all. You also said just now that for people holding foreign passports, in fact, there are many who are holding foreign passports. Even on the mainland, there are many people who are holding foreign passports. And if you're patriotic, then you should act in such a way and you should speak in such a way to show that you're patriotic. All right, time's out. Next, Mr. Hon LegCo. Thank you, Chairman. I noticed that I think number 73, Mr. Tan Kwok Kei, you were trying to you try to look at it from the religious point of view, and you talk about your view on the national anthem legislation. All right, from Bible. So what did you say about it? Please turn on his microphone. Well, according to my understanding, well, in Bible, God blessed the one in power. And also, legislation is there, and only those who are trying to break the law would be afraid of it. And if you are law-abiding, then you need not be afraid of it. All right, you might call it draconian law, then of course it's draconian, but then I don't think it's draconian at all. So it's about how you read the law. So how do we strive for a consensus while maintaining our differences? All right, I'm talking about how you can reach a consensus while maintaining your differences. Well, I don't know if you've read the book on Rome. That's part of the Bible. All right, as a Protestant, you will have to abide by the whoever is in power. But then if you look at that book of Rome, it said that it's not about being afraid of doing harms. Well, so long as you do things good, then you do not need to be afraid. And therefore, it's not just about asking you to be faithful. It's also about your own conscience. So the relationship is that, well, for those who are officials in government, you should not do something to make the people fear. So to put it this way, well, if you legislate to make people fear, then definitely people will be afraid, will be fearful. In fact, they should not just be afraid of the punishments. They should also be fearful because of their conscience. All right, if you love your country and love your nation and love your race, then they should not be regulated by draconian laws. They should be regulated by way of their conscience and also their conscience. So, what's your view on this? What's your take on this? All right, citizens should be protected by the local government, and they should observe the local legislation. All right, if they are not taking away our lives, if they are not taking away our properties, and if they are not depriving us of our freedoms and rights, then we should respect it. I think in Hong Kong we still enjoy those rights. All right, I'll give you the opportunity so that other speakers will also be able to speak. Are there any deputations here who would like to say a few words on this? I understand that Mr. Raymond Tam, you're also a Protestant. So how do you understand what I referred to in the episode of the Romans? Well, I'd just like to say this to the other Protestant. He said that the Bible asks people to respect those in power. I think the Bible that you're reading is a dysfunctional Bible. In fact, I don't need to recite it to you because in the old in the Old Testament, well, for the angels, among these amens, he criticized the regime in power. Time's out. Well, Miss Alice Mack, Chairman, I think we are in a Bible class. But then as Protestants, we have to know this. That is, amongst Protestants, we should not be questioning one another. We should try to accommodate one another. And to engage in a debate like that here, if you just try to question if other people understand the Bible correctly, I think that's not proper. It should have been done by a priest. Well, for other people, they should not be barging in when a member is speaking. Well, Chairman, I'm grateful to all the deputations.
I thank them for coming to speak to us, and I also thank them for their performance, because it shows exactly why we need rules, why we need to have laws. A lot of people said that, well, do we have to legislate for supporting our parents and to be filial? Well, yes, actually there is. There is the Article 49 of the PRC Constitution, and in 2013 on the mainland there was also a piece of legislation to protect the rights of old people. In the US there was another one. In Singapore in 1995 there was the law requiring one to support your parents. Could you please ask other members not to interrupt me? Please respect members who are speaking, because they won't be able to speak if you do. Well, if they continue to speak, they will show how laughable they are. And it shows that they don't understand. Chairman, please strictly enforce the rules of procedure. Well, people tolerate, no matter how offensive the things are. their performance and their attitude shows us that there is an urgency to legislate. This morning, someone asked if students need to sing the national anthem in Hong Kong. Well, the Singaporean International School will be taught a Singaporean national anthem. The school construction was funded partly by the Singaporean government. At that time, there was a discussion as to whether there was a need to have an international school of their country overseas. In the end, people thought that there was a need. There was a need to have civic education overseas. That's why the Singaporean citizens will be taught the national anthem. This is all part of the national education. However, in Hong Kong, when we talk about national education, they're demonized. As I said this morning, we're only talking about something that is common sense. Well, for some people, I don't know whether it's because of political reasons or not, they demonize this. They bury their conscience. They have no common sense whatsoever. I think that we do need to legislate for national anthem law as soon as possible. Of course, they have to take into account Hong Kong's local situation so that enforcement can be done effectively. The Secretary said that they would not just copy and paste the decision of the they would not just copy and paste the national law of the national anthem law of the PRC. We have to take into account Hong Kong's situation. We still have Mr. Yu Si-wing and a number of other members. I will draw a line here. Let me remind members again. When Ms. Alice Mack was speaking, some people who are present in the meeting disturbed her. Please respect the meeting. Do not interrupt others. It is not fair to her when people interfere when she was speaking. Next, Mr. Yu Si-wing. Thank you. Hong Kong is part of our country. It is reasonable to ask for local legislation of the national anthem. A number of people said that in a lot of overseas countries there are similar requirements. So it will be done. Since the reunification, when it comes to civic education, to teach our younger generation to love our country, there are inadequacies. That's why we have seen some bizarre phenomena recently. Some youngsters have misunderstood the situation of the mainland. So there was the incident of someone inverting the national anthem and spectators booing the national anthem in a football game. This has caused public concern and there are repercussions. This affects Hong Kong's reputation in the world. How will other people look at Hong Kong if Hong Kong people boo the national anthem of their own country? There is effective flow of information in Hong Kong and there is freedom of speech here in Hong Kong. So youngsters receive a lot of information. People, youngsters, children who are not mature, they might think, oh, this is fun and this is no big deal. Does it help them respect the national anthem of other countries? Don't make them think that there is no problem. If you disseminate this message, it will greatly affect other people. It is very wrong, and it affects other people. And we see that there are people who have misunderstood the mainland. They don't want to learn about the mainland situation. Hong Kong is a small market. We only have 7 million people. In the future, when they want to have a career, when they want to develop, they need to cast their eye onto the world, and they also have to take into account mainland China. This phenomenon has caused youngsters to resist the mainland, and they don't want to face their difficulties. People who are in politics will need to look deeply into what is the consequence of the current phenomenon. Yes, there is a need to legislate for national anthem. We see that some people are opposed to it, and it shows that they have misunderstood the situation. It is not a monster. I hope that the administration will step up their publicity. There are some die-hard people. You can never change their mind, but they are few and far between. We need to educate others so that they will have a correct understanding. Next, Mr. Horace Chung. A lot of people say that they understand that it is our constitutional duty, and there is a need in our you can see in our society. You may still remember that in a graduation ceremony of a university, in an international football game, inside and outside the meeting venue of the LegCo, there are lots of people who don't respect other people. It's disgraceful. It brings shame. And it seriously shows our youngsters a poor example. When someone burns national flag, someone else has said that this affects our freedom of expression. When we try to stop someone doing something derogatory to our national anthem, they said there is freedom of creation. And they also talk about academic freedom. Well, when you think you're right to snatch the phone off someone else, well, you think there is a problem. Ms. Claudia Mo said that do we need draconian law that if you steal something with your right hand, your right hand will be chopped off? You can see that the penalty, the tariff is reasonable. It's not the case that your right hand will be chopped off if you use it to steal. But it is not a solution if you don't do anything. I do think that the law is rather lax and reasonable. Articles 8 and 15 clearly states that if you don't do these things deliberately, that is behavior that is derogatory to the national anthem, then you will not be caught. A lot of these articles aim to educate people. Article 11 is about the national anthem being included in secondary and primary education. Secretary, I have good word to say about you this time, because this is about teaching youngsters of their constitutional duty. At the same time, you have preserved education autonomy to schools. This is appropriate. There is a person, a member of the public, play the ringtone of mobile phone, and then said that, well, people here show fake respect. I didn't hear that person properly. And I'd like to say, when we are having a meeting, assuming someone use phone rang and it's the national anthem, Secretary, could you explain to us and confirm to us that this is not an offense under the National Anthem Law? Article 7 says that, well, when people who are present, when the national anthem is performed, just like when someone play the score, well, it is not an event when the national anthem is played where people will have to stand. Next, Mr. Ray Chan. I thank deputations and individuals to come to speak to us. Well, Mr. Sotahai said something that made me remember him. He said that he would cry when he heard the national anthem. And it reminds me that, well, I felt moved when I saw the flag of Hong Kong or the flag of China. How come that some people nowadays don't feel moved, and they even have to use different ways to show that they are unhappy? Because this is something that the government will have to deal with. It's not the case that, well, stopping people from moving or singing it in other way will be the solution. I would like to ask something. Some people said that on the 4th of November last year, the NPCSC decided to include National Anthem Law into Annex 3 of the Basic Law. That's why we have the constitutional duty to do it. Well, Article 23 is in the Basic Law, but as you all know that, well, a lot of conditions will have to be met before it's legislated. It's been quite a long time since 97 till now. So if you want it to be done as soon as possible, but it doesn't mean that it will be done well. I would like to ask, the NPCSC decided to include National Anthem Law in Annex 3 of the Basic Law. Have they consulted the Hong Kong SAR government? Did the government say to them that, did they ask that? Did they say that, well, guidelines and some publicity and education will be better? Or is it the case that the Secretary had no choice? Starting the 1st of October last year on the mainland, the National Anthem Law came into operation. What's the situation of enforcement? Are there number of prosecutions in number of convictions for reference? Well, in relation to judicial, in relation to comparisons of different jurisdictions, because a lot of people mention about different countries. How many countries use administrative measures? What is the prosecution rate, conviction rate? If this work has not been done, I do think that is worth doing. There is also one point, Article 15. It says that, deliberately alters the lyrics or the score in a distorted manner. Well, we have different coverings or just derivative creations. They just change the lyrics. They don't mean to scold anyone. It's just like a member of public before. They just want to change the lyric to tell a story of Tian Han. And someone asked me, well, does it have to be played? What if it is just written in on paper? Does it constitute alters the lyrics in a distorted manner? 15 seconds. There are 3 questions. First, constitutional arrangement to include it in Annex 3. I'll be very strict with time. Next, Mr. Edward Lau. I thank people who come to speak to us. You can see that a lot of people agree with the National Anthem Law, but there is a small number of people who have different views. As someone said that respect, apart from being superficial, should come from inside. I agree. However, no matter how the country progresses and develops, some people refuse to acknowledge these positive impacts. Some people oppose to the National Anthem Law because they don't agree with the power. But I'm not asking you whether you respect the country. The spirit of the National Anthem Law is to respect yourself, respect others, respect the country. Do not deliberately insult the national anthem, because under the law, unless you deliberately insult the national anthem in a public occasion, then you will not have broken the law. It doesn't matter that you don't respect yourself, others, or your country, but no one asks you or make you insult the national anthem in public. In the past, a small group of people disrespect and insult the country. It's not just their problem. Society pays. Well, the football game is an example. We see some people who are unhappy with the country, they boo the national anthem. The Hong Kong FA was fined, and there might be serious consequence. Say, for example, football game with no public attendance. So this is not about a person. You can't say that whether I respect it or not is about myself. But if you don't do it, society may have to pay. That's why we need a piece of legislation to regulate it. Ms. Claudia Mo and some people said that it is a draconian law. Why don't you exaggerate more? Let's look at the penalty. I think that is rather lax. And I would like to say that, well, you will have to deliberately do the act before you commit the offense. National flag, the law has been in place for quite some time. How serious are the consequences? Dr. Chang Chung Tai did it a number of times. What was the penalty? Only a fine.
Even though, so I may not be happy with that. It's the way the law is. So I'd like to ask, will the criminal penalties for the National Anthem Law be similar? Now, the penalty of $50,000 and up to 3 years imprisonment, that's similar to the National Flag and Emblem Law. And so the National Flag Law has been in place. Now, how many people have been sentenced for insulting the national flag and national emblem? I think people need not be concerned. Next, Hong Chun-Yang. We thank the deputations and individuals. Now you see how the standards at LegCo is. Now we hope to listen to the people's views. This is not an occasion for people to insult members. Now, Mr. LegCo has uttered insulting remarks Now, you have not respected the freedom of speech. So when the members of public are insulted here, now members should respect them instead of insulting them. Now, I think some members do not listen to views contrary to their own. This is not an attitude appropriate for LegCo members. This is their value system. They cannot make decisions in accordance with social justice. Now, any members who give lip service to rule of law, now the Confucius and Mengzi said that people are good in nature, but people, even members of LegCo and of the government, can make mistakes. So that means they must be bound by framework. Similarly, with the National Anthem Law. Now, this is so that people with ulterior motives should not insult the national flag. Now, this is not to make unnecessary restrictions on the people. Now, our society is very complex. Hong Kong has a unique history. We were once a colony. Now, in recent Chinese history, Hong Kong, or rather China, has been subjected to shame and unfair treatment by foreign powers, and yet some people nowadays hold the Union Jack and claim that Britain is the sovereign. Now, so we should legislate to properly educate the future generation. So I like to let the Secretary respond to my comments and to other members' comments. Chairman, I agree that the sanctions in this law is not to force people to engage in certain patriotic acts, but this is just to prevent people from insulting the national flag and national anthem. Mr. Paul Chair, we thank you for being here this Saturday afternoon. Now, those who spoke said that we must respect the country. Actually, our requirement is not very high. It's not. We just ask you to respect the national anthem, even though you ignore it. You have even if you disregard it, you must not insult it. That is all that is asked for. You are asked to stand, but if you don't, you wouldn't break the law. And now, you don't have to respect the King of Thailand, but you must not insult the national flag or anthem. So this is not just for Hong Kong people, even foreign nationals, if they break the law in Hong Kong, they would be prosecuted. So even more so for a country, we need such laws. And some people talked about draconian laws. Now, the national flag and emblem law, they have similar provisions as for the National Anthem Law. Now, the fine, $50,000, and the maximum imprisonment of 3 years, these are not light provisions. Now, in the case of Cheng Chung Tai, now, one of the he is accused of what he's accused of involve 10 sets of national flag and emblem. In the other case 8 sets. Now, actually, the sentences of $50,000 and 3 years imprisonment, these are the maximum penalties. In fact, they won't be that high, and so the laws are not draconian at all. Now, for national flag and national emblem, you can cause insult by burning, smearing, and so on. And after the Cheng Chung Tai case, planting the flag upside down is also insulting. Now, Article 15, there are 3 ways of insulting. First, to change the, rewrite the lyrics, and secondly, it's about the melody, so. Please explain to us, Mr. Secretary, on what would constitute an insult to the basic, to the national anthem. Now, the time is up. The Secretary may not have time to respond. We thank those who are here today, and we will soon commence in the next section.